Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is anti-Semitism. In the women's movement, this was a movement created by Jewish women to fight for equality. And now Jewish women are being called oppressors. 2 years ago, as a reaction to the election of Donald J. Trump to the position of President of the United States, a very vocal group of women organized a protest called the Women's March. Thousands of women, almost entirely from the political left, joined ranks and marched through the streets of Washington and their home cities. This year, the third annual Women's March was scheduled to be held on January 19th, and then the march was canceled. Organizers explained that the cancellation by saying that the march had become too white. You see, a march for women was not interested in participation of white women, especially in the participation of women who were Jewish. Although it was not the reason for the cancellation, the march had become rife with anti-Semitism. The American press had been covering the Women's March and its ideology for several months. Even the venerable paper, the New York Times, ran a story, a front-page story, describing the anti-Semitic character of the Women's March, this third Women's March. In print, their article was entitled, "Anti-Semitism Accusations Royal Women's March," unquote. While the online version of the story read, and this was the title, "Women's March Roiled by Accusations of Anti-Semitism," far more pithy and straight to the point. How did this happen? How could a march organized by those on the political left, organized primarily by black women, a minority group clamoring for equality and critical of bias, turn its collective back on another minority and hurl critique on that group? One would think the participants in the Women's March would join hand in hand in the condemnation of anti-Semitism. One would think that the organizers of the Women's March be front and center in condemning anti-Semitism. But no, they were the people responsible for spewing forth and perpetrating anti-Semitic bias in the context of women's rights. That thinking is convoluted and wrong. If you can make no sense of it, that is because it makes no sense. It goes like this. Because Jews are white, they are viewed as white oppressors. Levi Cotton Pogrobin, the founder of Ms. Magazine, and the person whose feminist and Jewish bona fides are without question, confirmed this attitude in a letter to the editor of the New York Times. In her letter, Pogrobin pointed out that anti-Semitism in the liberal movement is not new. 40 years ago, she wrote, she confirmed and confronted the exact same anti-Semitism. When it comes to anti-Semitism and the leftist movements, logic plays no role. We see it historically. We see it in the period that heralded the rise of Zionism. The socialist and communist movements were ideal homes for Jews in Europe. Jews were an oppressed minority, and by definition, the doctrine, socialism, and communism offered protection from the oppressor. Jews, however, were not welcome in those movements. From the very beginning, there was a tension with the Jews. Ironically, thankfully, the future of the Jewish state, the tension was extremely positive, and the future of Jews and Jewish socialism was there in Israel. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, co-authors of the Communist Manifesto, the guidebook to communism and socialism, originally partnered with the third philosopher and thinker, Moses Hess. He was the third person in the triumvirate. He was a member of the inner circle, a Jew, the man who went on to father labor Zionism and conceptualize socialist Zionist philosophy, was forced out and denounced as a utopian socialist by Marx. Movements founded on the principle of unity against racism and hatred have one caveat: everyone was equal, everyone but Jews. The socialist movement and the socialist literature were heavily based on the German language, but it was only the elite who wrote and spoke in German. The masses were not in Germany. The Jews were part of that rank and file population, and those Jews spoke Yiddish. Those Jewish Jews were not welcome. As a result, two Jewish socialist groups emerged. One group was composed of Jewish socialists called the Bund. The other was Jewish Zionist socialists. They embraced Yiddish as a language and as a socialist message. They created organizations like the Workmen's Circle and opened schools and newspapers and radio stations, even plays and theaters. The ideology that began in Europe was later transplanted to America as members immigrated to the Golden Medina, the United States. Socialist Zionists felt the best response was excising Jews from Europe and bringing them to Israel and Palestine. And once ensconced in the Jewish enclave, establishing a Jewish utopia. These are the socialists who founded and created the modern state of Israel. They came with their bias, and they built a socialist state. They came about it from a slightly different direction, but the goal of both movements was the same. These Jewish revolutionaries were trying to solve problems. The biggest among them was anti-Semitism. This story has a bittersweet ending. Had Jews been welcomed into the original communist and socialist movements, much of the impetus to create a state of Jews would have been diluted. As for achieving the goal of solving the problem of anti-Semitism, well, we're still fighting that one. Witness the Women's March of 2019. I'm also thinking about the modern state of Israel and the problems Israel is facing today. Not ideology, not ideological problems, defense and safety, and security problems. Israel discovered 5 terrorist tunnels dug by Hezbollah. That's in the north. The tunnels originated in Lebanon and crawled underground and ended inside Israel. Some of these tunnels were hidden 300 feet beneath the ground. The discovery was big news. Hamas, another terrorist organization bent on the destruction of Israel, has also tunneled into Israel, but that's in the south. Those tunnels emanated in Gaza and made the news and partially sparked Operation Protective Edge in July of 2014. The difference between Hamas in the south in Gaza and Hezbollah in the north in Lebanon, their tunnels, is not that the Hamas dug into the southern end of Israel and Hezbollah dug into the north, but rather the difference is that Hamas tunnels were dug out of soft ground and sand. Their tunnels needed to be supported with cement. The tunnels dug by Hezbollah in Lebanon are dug through solid rock. Ultimately, the objective of all tunnels built into Israel is the same. Both Hamas and Hezbollah intend to use tunnels as a weapon of attack against Israel. Tunnels bring with them the element of surprise. The goal of these tunnels, of these terrorists, is to strike without warning, kill a large number of innocent Israelis, and then scamper back into their tunnels and make their escape. Also high on their plan is kidnapping Israelis, preferably Israeli soldiers or children. Israel has destroyed the tunnels. The method used to destroy the tunnel was determined by the type of tunnel. Each tunnel was different. Some were destroyed by explosives. The last Hezbollah tunnel Israel discovered was flooded with water, cement, and bentonite. Israel's objective in flooding the tunnel with water was clear and simple. When you imagine these tunnels, don't think of a straight shot from point A to point B. They're complex structures. Each tunnel is a labyrinth with multiple entrances and exits, detours on and off chutes. By using a tremendous force of pressure and flushing millions of gallons of salt water from the Mediterranean through the tunnel, Israel was able to then look at satellite photos and determine exactly where all the tunnel openings and exits were located. And then they discovered that some sections of the tunnel originated inside homes, only 2 miles away from Israel. The pictures Israel made public were of a cement factory that was recently built. From the factory, you can easily see the flooding of water Israel had flushed through. There was another reason Israel decided to flush the tunnel with water: cement and bentonite. The big worry is that after an explosion, the tunnels can be cleared. They can be cleaned out and used again. Cleaning out a destroyed tunnel is actually easier than digging a new one. But not if the tunnel is flooded with cement and bentonite. Cement is obvious. Bentonite requires some explanation. Bentonite is a type of mud. It can be dried and added to various liquids. It is often used to seal wells and repair leaks. The most interesting characteristic of the substance is that when inside a liquid, it makes the liquid very thick. When you shake it, it becomes less viscous and can flow. Sound familiar? Bentonite is like ketchup. The purpose of shaking the ketchup bottle before use is not to put back the yucky fluid that leached out and floats at the top. The purpose is to allow you to pour your ketchup into your fries, onto your hot dog. Israel dumped the proper proportions of water, cement, and bentonite into the tunnel to make sure that it was sealed off and rendered unusable. Tunnels are very difficult, a tremendously difficult weapon to defend against. They have a long history of use as both extremely efficient and effective defensive and offensive weapons. Tunnels were first used in the ancient times. They were used in Greece and Rome also. They were used in China. The sewers, when you think sewers, think that sewers of the tunnels of London, Paris, are extremely famous. During the Holocaust, Jewish children in Warsaw used sewers, tunnels, to smuggle food and weapons. Experts believe that North Korea has tunnels that burrow underneath into South Korea. Those tunnels are rumored to be so large that they can move 30,000 troops per hour. Fighting against tunnels has always been nearly impossible. It required knowing where the entrances and exits and all the twists and turns were located. Weapons used above ground were, for the most part, almost useless in tunnel warfare. But over the past year, Israel has developed a top-secret technique, near-perfect technology, that can detect tunnels and determine their depth and their size. Enemies of Israel will continue to attack. Hezbollah and Hamas will not change. Those responsible for policing the region to assure that the borders are secure, the UN and the Lebanese army, will continue to stand idly by and watch. Israel must act, and Israel does act. Israel destroys tunnels. They wait, they watch, and they destroy. It's just like Carly Simon's song, now catching a catchy catch-up commercial, as you remember. It tells us it's simply a matter of anticipation. Still thinking about safety and security issues, I'm thinking about Iran. Iran is calling the United States out on their support for Saudi Arabia. Iranian leadership is actually particularly critical of the United States selling nuclear technology to the Saudis. They are so angry that Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif went so far as to assert that the United States is exhibiting the highest levels of hypocrisy. As part of his tirade against the United States, the Iranian Foreign Minister argued that while the United States is extremely critical of Iran and their nuclear development, they look the other way when Saudi Arabia dismembers a journalist in Turkey. That incident, he said, is part of the United States' double standard. In the tweet, Zarif wrote, "First, a dismembered journalist, now illicit sale of nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia, fully expose #US hypocrisy." Zarif is not wrong. The U.S. sale of nuclear technology to the Saudis and the relative silence in response to the brutal execution of Jamal Khashoggi is indeed troubling. And while Congress, on both sides of the aisle, has made serious demands to investigate the murder, the administration has not really pushed the issue about the sale of nuclear technology to the Saudis. Here, too, Iran has a very good point. And Iran should, rightfully, be worried. On the other hand, there is a convincing argument for selling nuclear technology to the Saudis. The argument is that Iran itself is sprinting towards an attempt to attain nuclear weapons. And if that doesn't scare Congress, it should. In fact, the ongoing game of hide and seek that Iran has been playing with nuclear technology should be the only argument needed in favor of providing the Saudis with U.S. technology. As angry, upset, scared as they are, Iran is solely responsible for this countermove by the United States and Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia are arch enemies. The United States needs to keep Iran in check and wants to do them damage. The sale under those circumstances makes perfect diplomatic sense. It might just save parts of the world from destruction. Once upon a time, the glue that bound the United States and Saudi Arabia was oil. No more. Times have changed. Needs have changed. The world has changed. But that doesn't mean that everything is better. There are still serious dangers lurking within this new alliance between the United States and the Saudis. The U.S. and the Saudis are not friends. That must be absolutely clear. They are allies on only a few certain issues and worlds apart in so many other ways. Take governing, minority rights, equality of women, religion, and even access to information and freedom of expression, to name a few. Not to mention accountability of leaders to their citizens, equal protection under the law. Those are just a few of the major divides between the countries. Much of what the United States holds dear is not shared in any way, shape, or form by Saudi leaders. The ideals that are the essence and the character of the United States are anathema to Saudi Arabia. The link between the United States and Saudi Arabia is a distrust of Iran. And in the world of international affairs, mutual interests dictate actions. The United States and Saudi Arabia have entered into an alliance, not a friendship. That's an alliance. Iran is correct in pointing this out. Once the Saudis get a nuclear technology they want, there will be nothing to stop them from going off in directions that do not in any way segue with U.S. interests. Iran knows that well. They want everyone else to know it just as well. Coming up, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column. It's from the New York Post, and it's written by Danny Danon, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. This column was published in print on February 8th, 2019. It was titled in print, "First They Came for the Israelis." Online, February 7th, 2019, it was titled, "When Anti-Semitism Pretends to be Just Anti-Israel." Ambassador Danon addresses anti-Semitism and the importance of confronting it. This is how he begins. Last week, I led 40 United Nations ambassadors on a trip to Poland to become witnesses to the Holocaust, and then to Israel to experience the miracle of the reborn nation state of the Jewish people. As the Holocaust recedes into the past, the world is witnessing a resurgence of anti-Semitism. Most Western leaders condemn this bigotry when it targets diaspora Jews, but too often they disregard, dismiss, or even justify Jew hatred when it targets Jews in their national homeland, Israel. This willful neglect of anti-Semitism against Israeli Jews poses the greatest danger to diaspora Jews, since it legitimizes anti-Semitism everywhere. The Jewish diaspora feels besieged, more so than it has in a long time. In Europe, attitudes towards Jews, not expressed since the 1930s, has become commonplace, with over 80% of European Jews identifying anti-Semitism as the primary threat to their safety, according to recent surveys. In 2014, relentless attacks compelled more than 1,000 French Jews to immigrate to Israel. This even though Israel was fighting a military operation against Hamas at the time. In Britain, meanwhile, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition Labour Party, has described Hamas and Hezbollah as our friends and laid wreaths at the graves of Palestinian terrorists. Of course, the rise of anti-Semitism isn't just a European phenomenon. It also threatens American Jewish community. Ambassador Danon now connects anti-Semitism with anti-Israel, the sentiment he postulates that they are one and the same. He wants people to condemn it as such. His column continues. Instead of viewing anti-Semitism against Israelis as the irrational bigotry that it is, the world often attributes it to rational motives, part of a legitimate national struggle. Western apologists justify violent riots, shouting Jews, "We're coming to slaughter you," at the Gaza border, claiming such hateful outbursts are an understandable reaction to the occupation. Ditto, 17-year-old Palestinian who last year murdered Ari Fuld, an Israeli-American Jew, in cold blood. People who would rightly condemn violence against Jews for being Jews as anti-Semitism lose their moral bearings when it comes to Israel, where political, territorial, or economic reasons are offered as alibis for what is, at the core, anti-Semitism. Danon concludes by writing, "This new form of anti-Semitism is especially pernicious, as it will bide its time until an ever-changing political climate allows it to reveal its true nature and turn on its ultimate target, the Jewish people everywhere. It is imperative for the world to recognize that, to paraphrase the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., anti-Semitism anywhere is a threat to Jews everywhere. An attack against a Jew for being a Jew must be condemned for what it is, bigotry, regardless of whether it occurs in New York, Paris, or Jerusalem." Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show 3 cartoons today. 2 critique Ilhan Omar, the new Democratic Congresswoman, and her blatant anti-Semitism. The third is simply funny. As I often say, sometimes it's important to laugh. Otherwise, we would always be crying. The first is by Tom Stigler. It was published on March 5th, 2019. On a banner of blue, a heart with the U.S. flag is featured. Under the heart is written what has become a modern catchphrase: "Hate has no home here." Omar is holding a can of spray paint, red spray paint, and wearing a button with a line, a red line, through an Israeli flag. The word no is X'd out with red paint, and the letter A is put there instead. Next up is a cartoon by Drybones, Yaakov Kirshen, from his blog, February 13, 2019. It's titled, Meet America's New Democrats. Ilan Omar is standing on an Israeli flag, and the caption reads, Their stand on Israel. The final cartoon is also by Drybones. It was published February 4th. It's about Israel's moon lander. Two fellas are walking, and one says to the other, Israel's moon lander is scheduled to reach the surface of the moon later this month. And then what? The second fella says, I guess it starts planting trees. I told you it was funny. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israeli news reported that 3 ancient Torah scrolls were stolen from a synagogue in Tehran. There was no doubt the synagogue was burgled and the Torahs were taken. The synagogue is only one of many Jewish buildings in the compound. There are 2 Jewish schools, a ritual bath, a lab used to check chotnus, the forbidden blend of wool and linen in clothing. The scrolls were several hundred years old. It's not clear why the Torahs were stolen. The immediate assumption it was an act of anti-Semitism. I don't think that's it. The real and most probable reason for a theft would be money. Burglars probably stole the 3 Torahs in order to sell them to a fence, who would then sell them to collectors. Sometimes a burglary, even in the synagogue, is only a burglary. The U.S. Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, known as THAAD, T-H-A-A-D, is deployed in Israel for the first time. The United States is showing its support for Israel by deploying this new weapon in Israel. The weapon, along with 200 U.S. soldiers, will, without a doubt, enhance and supplement Israel's security. This weapon will add to Israel's already extensive anti-missile defense shield and protect Israel against attacks from Iran and Syria. The THAAD anti-rocket land-to-air system is made by Lockheed Martin. The rocket travels, get this, Mach 8.24. That translates to 2.8 kilometers per second, almost 3 kilometers a second. In October 2017, the United States provided the same system, THAAD, to Saudi Arabia. The obvious reason at the time was to protect the Saudis from an Iranian threat. We were just talking about that. The THAAD system cost about $15 billion. It's an investment well worth it when it comes to protecting U.S. allies. It has been reported that Israeli intelligence has issued 2 reports describing how Iran smuggled special systems to retrofit Hamas's rockets and make them more accurate with GPS satellite guidance systems. The report describes that the new guidance system was brought in small suitcases. The size of an airplane carry-on bag, what we commonly call wheelies. Hamas smuggled this new technology, which literally transforms the status quo on the ground. A simple rocket is now computerized smart bomb. A game changer. Israel is preparing for a swarm of locusts that is capable of devastating plant growth and agriculture. Locusts have begun making their way towards Israel as a result of heavy rains that fell in eastern Yemen and Sudan, the Eritrean border also. The Israeli Ministry of Agriculture explains that the huge swarms of locusts have begun migrating from Saudi Arabia. They will make their way to southern Israel via a small stretch of Jordan and over the Red Sea. Israel has prepared a series of pesticides to stop the locusts. A similar swarm was stopped by Israel in 2013. While most of the locusts were destroyed, several 100,000 still got through and caused tremendous plant damage. Locusts do not pose any danger to humans, but they have the ability to destroy an entire agricultural produce of Israel. Iran is trying to understand why European nations have not started to buy their oil. In November, 8 European nations received an official waiver from the United States permitting them to buy oil from Iran. None of them have really taken advantage of the waivers. Fars, an official Iranian news agency, posted comments of Bijan Zanganeh, Iran's oil minister. He said that they have been in contact with the Europeans and that there has been no movement or interest. We have called them many times, but they do not return our calls. He was probably referring to Greece and Italy. There are interesting lessons that we must learn from this. First, U.S. sanctions are hurting Iran. Second, the countries that get permission to trade with Iran are still reluctant to do so because of feared backlash from the United States. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that nearly the entire book of Joel describes a locust plague? Locusts play a significant role in the story of Passover. It was one of the 10 plagues. A swarm of locusts is a natural plague. They fly very low, and they block out all the light and make it disappear. It almost becomes dark as they descend. Locusts do not prey on humans. They just freak them out and get in the way. They descend on vegetation and devour it. They wipe it clean and then move on. Locusts can destroy an entire country's economy, and Africa and the Middle East have to confront that. They often come from Egypt and Saudi deserts. Originally, in order to stop the entry and protect their crops from locusts, Israel dug ditches filled with kerosene and lit them up. Because the locusts fly low to the ground, the heat singed their wings and they were stopped. Today, there are other methods in the operation. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.